Howdy, everybody. That's right, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. You should all be in bed. This is what happens when you have insomnia. Might as well record the lecture that I should have recorded a couple hours ago. Anyway, I hope everybody's well. Hope you had an interesting weekend. I know I'll be looking at your essay soon. What I want to talk about today is we're going to skip a little bit. I'm going to go back to the American Revolution, but right now, because it's October, we're getting into the Halloween segment of our lives. Flash forward to chapter 28. If you take a look at that in your textbook, they call it the romantic hero. I'm not sure I agree with all that, but it doesn't have to be because it's written there that I have to agree with it. Anyway, I want to cover three things that make this chapter important and why we're kind of going a little bit further ahead, because things are happening so fast right now in the culture. America's coming on really strong. We're now producing some great individuals. Walt Whitman, the poet, who is essentially almost the father of what we might call modern poetry. I'm going to hit him a little later, not tonight. The founding fathers, the incredible thing called the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. Big doings are happening. Our War of Independence. But in the 1780s, right after our revolution, another revolution was starting in France for their independence from the aristocracy, not from another country like American Revolution. This light's a little bright. It's a little better. But from the class system that was there that was failing. We have kings and queens, royalty, and then we have poverty. And it was a bad mix. So the French Revolution was afoot. They saw what we had done. They took many of the things that we did in our revolution, and they did their own, except for lots of key differences. One of the leaders that came out of that revolution, Napoleon, maybe you've heard of him. He was a man of ambition, and throughout history in different countries, he sometimes is portrayed as an evil person. If you go to France, he's a national hero. He's essentially the French George Washington. And he had a massive army, and they defeated many countries. And that's where he went wrong eventually. Got too ambitious, and he got a little crazy with acquiring countries and land, and eventually he failed. But they consider him a romantic hero because to his people he was, until he failed when he went up against Russia. While this is going on in the world at this very time, in England, some poets got together, Lord Byron, Shelley, Mary Shelley, and they made a bet one night. Who could write a horror story? Mary Shelley wrote a novel that is essentially revered to this day and started modern horror. It was called Frankenstein. Have you heard of it? They made it into movies, comedies, Mel Brooks, the Sears movies, sequels, many sequels, about a doctor who supposedly is mad. He wants to make a human being for good, not for bad, folks, out of dead body parts. And so they go to the cemetery and they find the body of somebody, the head of somebody, and they put this thing together in the dark of night, on a stormy night where electricity was in the air. And during that night, they reanimated essentially a corpse. What they didn't know, and where the horror comes in, we should leave the life, creative of life, to other things, not to a deranged scientist. And they created a monster. Dr. Frankenstein did, folks. The monster isn't called Frankenstein, but people call it that for some reason. And of course, all hell breaks loose. And this story changed the culture. This is our Halloween month, so I thought I'd throw some of this in there. Might as well get started early on the horror show that we love so much. In about 2 weeks, I'm going to take a week and just discuss horror. Modern horror, movies, literature, anything from Stephen King to whatever you might think is modern horror. What is horrifying to you? Monsters? Psychological horror? We're going to be exploring that in this month of Halloween. But tonight we're starting off with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. She was a very young woman when she wrote this. She was only 18 or 19. And it became a phenomenon. We're still reading it to this day. We're still making movies. We're still analyzing because she hit on a very important element of our human need to try to understand who we are. Even though she created a monster, the monster, we're empathetic to the monster. It's not his fault that he's a monster. He wasn't asked to be brought back from the dead. And of course, he's misunderstood as the other, He's a flawed hero in a way because he didn't create his own life. That was created for him by somebody else. He didn't choose to be a monster. And so when he is roaming the countryside, the people are terrified of it because we're always terrified of the other. And it's not going to end good, folks. There's some beautiful moments in the story, beautiful, tender moments, and horrifying moments too. And this book, written by this young woman, captured our imaginations, you know, almost 300 years ago. So go to modules. There is a Mary Shelley documentary I want you guys to take a look at. Tell me what you think. Start a discussion. I'll post it probably tomorrow. What is a hero? What is a romantic hero? Some people think Napoleon was a monster. Others don't have that same opinion. I'll probably post a little documentary on Napoleon so you can kind of come up to speed. Just got to go find one. Just because you're the other doesn't mean you're evil. We should learn this lesson. Look what's going on in the world right now in Afghanistan and immigrants from Haiti trying to come here to have a better life. And there are some people who want to keep them out because they weren't born here, because they're the other. We don't understand their language, their culture, therefore the other. Well, Frankenstein's monster was the other, folks. Big time. Misunderstood. Hunted down for his uniqueness, his otherness. And that's part of our national disgrace, but it's also what makes us human. And Mary Shelley captured a lot of that in this little novel she wrote 300 years ago on a bet. Frankenstein. Other novels were being written at the time in America. One of the things that was horrifying in America at the time was slavery. It was legal, but there was a movement. There was rumblings in this movement. Frederick Douglass was a former slave who escaped and became a statesman and an abolitionist. That means they want to abolish slavery. Um, he is the fierce face of the anti-slave movement that eventually led to our Civil War. But this is many years before that was happening. Novels like Uncle Tom's Cabin came out, and that was another anti-slavery novel. And so the horror of slavery was on this very new and rich land called America. The other was walking amongst us. someone just with a different skin color than white was considered the other. But things are happening and things are changing, and people are opening their eyes. They're starting to look at the other in a different way, that maybe we're all the other. That's what Mary Shelley was writing about. So Napoleon, I'm trying to tie all this together. Napoleon is out there defeating countries, and for blind ambition, national pride, yes, absolutely. He failed. But he also started the beautiful notion of liberty. And that's not easy to pull off. Liberty, freedom of choice. We're still struggling with that all these years later. Every country is struggling with that. And these things were going on 300 years ago. Before social networking, before smartphones, before movies, before so much that we understand and we know. It was happening then. The struggle for freedom, for individual rights, and for liberty. It's been going on since the Roman times. But now we're into modern times. Literature, music, paintings. So in the chapter 28 in your book, go through, look at Mary Shelley. You have the excerpt here from her book, chapter 5, chapter 4. Then we have a little chapter on Frederick Douglass, and you get a little thumbnail sketch on the movement that is going to lead to our Civil War eventually. So a lot's happening in this 50, 60-year period of time. The culture is percolating with possibilities. And like everything else, that when there's possibilities, there's also the possibility of failure. But the fight was on. And it's being taken up by writers and painters, musicians, composers. That's who fights the good fight, folks. I'm going to keep this one short tonight because it is 2:30 in the morning. And I will eventually have to crawl off to bed. I hope you guys are getting something out of this course. This week, we're going to be hitting a large part of what's going on in America and how we are already starting to become a world leader. And we're a very brand new country. So I'm going to post those documentaries. I'll post the documentary. The one on Mary Shelley is posted. I'll probably post a couple more docs for you to look at, Frederick Douglass, and to give you a good feel for it. For those of you who don't have the book yet, you'll be able to see a documentary and do some research on these people. Because that's what the course is about, learning new things. And we're standing on the shoulders of these people, these historical people to this day. Stephen King, horror writer, is standing on Mary Shelley's little tiny shoulders. Has to start somewhere. Why not? Okay. Keep the faith, keep the papers writing. I'm a little behind on the last, I can't remember the last, I think I have about 8 papers to grade the Dutch painters before I start on the composers. See you soon when the story of humanities will continue.